hatred, oppressing people, the Palestinians. And then of course we get to the kind of meat of the matter where, you know, Israel is this kind of eye of Mordor, the sort of the evil Zionist entity that kind of controls the banking system and whatever. And so with all these projections, it's kind of interesting to see what kind of actual like day-to-day life in Israel is actually like. So that's the kind of the idea behind this exchange. But let's kind of begin by introducing you. You are really into veganism, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, you know, would you like to mention your vegan enterprise?
Mention what? Sorry?
Oh, like what's the core of your sort of vegan activities, I guess?
Oh, well, mostly it's Facebook based, as you've probably noticed. But I also tried to start this YouTube channel with very limited success.
Mm-hmm.
And it was mostly an attempt to, well, if I ever start working on it again, I guess it will mostly be meta-activism, or like how to help activists be more effective when they're communicating with non-vegans to persuade them to change their behavior.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I guess that's it.
Yeah, but so what is like the name of your Facebook page?
Oh, Guillemette de Machaut.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe you can like link it or whatever.
Yeah, I'll definitely link it. Yeah.
I'm actually very interested in any non-vegans who are remotely curious in the topic. I'm more than happy to add you to my friends list and discuss it with you.
Yeah. So, but the big kind of theme I got from being on that page is there are a lot of kind of gory pictures of animals, but there's also like the theme seems to be that it's easier to be a soy boy. Being a soy boy is easier than ever today.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. When I first went vegan, that was almost 10 years ago, no one even knew what that meant. I didn't know what the word vegan meant until watching this documentary. And, you know, the foods were very limited. There were not many vegan restaurants, not many vegan options at non-vegan restaurants. And today, that's just so far from the case. I mean, I don't know about other countries, but at least in Israel, every non-vegan restaurant has a score of vegan options, like a specific vegan menu, in fact, even if you're talking about like a steakhouse or something. Every place accommodates vegan. So I really think, I really like to encourage Israelis to consider that. I mean, because it's literally just as convenient as being a non-vegan to be a vegan here. Maybe a little more difficult in other countries, but
yeah, not
really
so much
it's just
here
a matter
in Ohio.
of habit.
Not so much here in Ohio.
Yeah, what's the vegan scene like there?
I don't know that there is a vegan scene here. I mean, I guess if I were to go to like around universities or like more hip areas, but this is not where I live right now. So yeah, I mean, I doubt that there's like many vegan options here and like the you know, in the few miles from where I live in kind of the suburbs.
Yeah, well, I mean, for people who are concerned about that, I just encourage them to eat at home, save money. It's a lot cheaper to be vegan if that's one of your concerns. And add on to that the expense you'll be sparing from going to restaurants.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I used to be a very religious Buddhist, but that hasn't prompted me to give up meat. But it has certainly been kind of something, a thought. I used to, like, when I would see roadkill on the road, I would say a Buddhist mantra for them to have a better reincarnation. But nevertheless, didn't prevent me from eating meat. Yeah, it would also like be like not step on rainworms and different insects. But it's hard to give up meat. But like my personal perspective is that it's kind of like an animal. On the one hand, if it wasn't harvested for food, it wouldn't be born. But on the other hand, if its whole life is total misery and there doesn't seem to be a way to feed the human population today without its life being total misery, then yeah, motherfuckers should give up meat. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, people often bring that up, that they would go extinct without us using them. But I mean, I think most non-vegans are in favor of, for example, schizophrenic people going extinct, people who have like some rare pain disorders where they're in chronic pain. Like people want chronic pain to go extinct. I mean, there are all kinds of situations which we don't consider lives worth beginning, and clearly an animal on a farm, they don't really have a life worth beginning. We wouldn't consider a human living in such standards to have a life worth beginning.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, schizophrenics, if schizophrenics would go extinct, Stefan Molyneux would lose a lot of his subscribers, but I mean, you could make an argument like schizophrenia could be interconnected with other genetic traits that are beneficial. That's probably one of the reasons why it exists. But anyway, we digress. So yeah.
That's actually, I just wanted to note, there's this really incredible lecture I've seen on schizoid personality disorder, which is arguably like a lesser version of schizophrenia, and schizoid personality disorder is actually very beneficial in many contexts. So yeah, just thought I would note that.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of them, like autism, obviously, like on some ends of the spectrum, has like profound benefits. Like so much of our technology and math is probably due to autistic achievements. But yeah, so yeah, I mean, it's better not to eat meat. It's sometimes it's like specifically for some reason I have this thing for chickens where I'm just grossed out, and it's like I don't even like chickens that much, and it's probably why. And it's just the idea of this like limited bird with like limited capacity just sitting in a metal cage and just being like treated like a plant in a way, like a it's kind of disgusting. It's just the generic nature of chickens, and it's not for my affinity. I have like affinity for octopi.
Oh, me too.
Yeah.
I love them.
Yeah, I wouldn't eat them. I mean, they're very intelligent, you know. But chicken,
yeah,
like...
have you ever swam with an octopus before?
No.
Oh, it's a beautiful experience. You should definitely seek that out one day.
Yeah. Yeah, they solve puzzles, and but they always will attack another octopus and try to destroy it, which is interesting with octopi, is that they can have social relationships with humans, but it's not clear why, because they're not social animals. They would just attack another octopus. So it's a kind of a quirk of evolution that they have some recessive kind of social behavior that's in no ways connected with their existence, and for some reason can manifest with a primate. So yeah, those are interesting things, but nothing is more interesting than Israel. Let's so you're originally from Canada, right?
Yeah.
And how old were you when you came to Israel?
Oh, I think like 21.
Oh, 21. That's pretty late. Is it true that your family migrated because they didn't want to be in the same country with Jordan Peterson, or?
I actually migrated on my own. You know, we all go through this adolescent crisis, and some of us respond by getting a pet. Some of us respond by moving to another country.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's politically incorrect now to ask how long you've been in Israel. I guess than asking about a lady's age, or yeah.
Oh, I'm not quite old enough such that it's rude to ask. So yeah, 5 years ago, 4 or 5, I think. I haven't even been keeping track.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's an interesting perspective. And how did your family react when you moved? Did they think you were crazy, or?
I'm not really actually close with my family, so that's a separate story. But
okay. Awkward. Sorry, I asked. Listen, maybe you need to clean your room here and get practice with the lobsters, and then sort yourself out. Yeah. But do you speak Hebrew well at this point?
Not too well. I mean, I guess well enough to communicate, well enough to like have a conversation, well enough to even like have a conversation possibly about veganism or something. But beyond that, I mean, definitely not academic level. That's for sure.
Well, yeah. But so what were your kind of first impressions when you came? Like, did you just kind of want to be in a country, like that saying goes, where I guess if somebody calls you a dirty Jew, that means you need to take a bath or something. That kind of an idea. Is that something that attracted you?
Well, to be perfectly honest, my original ideas for coming here were to trigger Muslims. So, so that was a major reason because, you know, when you're living in a country, a very PC country where there's a lot of anti-Zionism, you know, it really is, it really motivates you to just say, well, you know what, fuck you. I'm going to live here and I'm going to tell you about it. So I had a number of Muslim friends and just regular white allies, so-called, who were virulently anti-Israel. So yeah, I just wanted to trigger them. And, you know, I thought it would be a nice, interesting adventure. Yeah. And well, you asked about my first impressions. Well, as you know, like going to any country in the very beginning is definitely novel and interesting. And I kind of appreciated that novelty in the beginning, and I enjoyed the cultural differences and seeing new stuff, new surroundings, new climate. So yeah, my first impressions were positive, despite the fact that this is definitely not a country, a first world country like Canada or Britain or America. In terms of like waste disposal, like it's quite a dirty place, quite an unorganized place, quite a undeveloped in some ways place. But you know, just like going to probably Afghanistan for the first few days, you find that interesting and novel, and you enjoy that.
That's a strange kind of comparison. But were your friends back in Canada? Did you trigger the snowflakes with your?
There was this one guy who I think he stopped talking to me, but yeah, I mean, unfortunately, people just don't really care about what other people are doing as much as I'd hoped, so I guess not. Yeah, it's like, I guess you moving to Israel is like me posting my links to my YouTube videos on my main Facebook page, you know? Nobody gives a shit. Well, I care, and my friends who subscribe to your channel care a lot, and I hope they're watching. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I can understand a person moving to Israel, actually, maybe not for your reasons, but just in general, like, especially if you have certain inclinations, there is a kind of a, and I don't necessarily mean it in a negative way, but a kind of a tribal component to us, like, for much of my kind of 20s, I was looking for my identity, and like the idea of like moving back to Russia was really appealing to me. And I really I had these kind of explosions of Russian kind of nationalism that were really kind of awkward at some points. But yeah, I mean, I can understand sort of that, and it's not, everything is kind of, I mean, tribalism is a bad thing overall, but it's not always a horrible thing. And, you know, it's just like you are sort of, even though I've lived in America for most of my life now, like for 20 years, and I'm 32, but I'm still kind of have a subtle, not even that much of a subtle, a sense of being out of sync, and I can understand sort of, you know, going there. Yeah, and I mean, Israel isn't just the only place where somebody could be like called a dirty Jew and it means you need a bath, but it could also, like, I could move to Israel and say with an open heart that the Jews run the media here, you know? That's a true point. And how would you say, like, Israeli Jews are different from like Jews in North America, let's say? Well, I'd say the difference is not in the favor of Israeli Jews. I mean, if you've only encountered Jews in America, or actually in any first world country, your impression will be entirely positive. Just very educated people, very intellectual, very ethically motivated, people very concerned with justice. And if you look at the average Jew here, I mean, there's a class of people who are like that, who are very, very educated, but the average person is nothing like that. Very uneducated, very, I'd say, kind of like on a violent bent, like, how do you say, not physically violent, but a little bit verbally violent. Yeah. Just not the greatest people, I would say. Wow. The average person. And I mean, if you look at the average IQ here, it's considerably lower than the average Jewish IQ in America, so I'm not sure if there's a connection. Would that be Jewish IQ? People point out that there's 20%
Israeli Arab population. So.
No, actually, if you actually look at the Ashkenazi Jewish IQ here, it's about, I think, 10 points lower on average than the Ashkenazi American or European IQ.
Oh, wow, that's interesting. That's interesting, interesting bit of information. That would...
Yeah, and I'm not saying it's a racial thing. Like, I'm sorry, I'm not saying it's a genetic thing, but, you know, you can have very toxic kind of cultures, which are, I'd say this culture is very much influenced by Middle Eastern culture in general, which, you know, it's not really the best culture.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm like familiar with like Russian Jews, and there is a kind of what?
They're Russian Jews in America are just phenomenal. Russian Jews in Israel.
Well, Russian Jews in Russia and America. Like when I was growing up in Moscow, and even though the numbers of Jews in Moscow are, of course, would be much lower after like North American English-speaking countries, there's still a pretty sizable population by continental European standards, like 200,000 Jews in Russia, and most of them are in Moscow. And I had some Jewish friends growing up, but I didn't really think of them, as Jews. Well, in a sense, I didn't know what Jews were. I mean, I was just a kid, so. But a lot of kind of Jews, Russian Jews in America are pretty can be pretty right-wing, let's say. Some of them are.
Oh, yeah, that's the thing. But I mean, at least they're educated. If the average Russian Jew here, I don't want to generalize, because there are like there's a subset of them who are just stand-up people, but let's just say there's a lot of crime and ignorance among some of the average ones.
But okay, but what's the positive? What we're kind of got into. But what's the positive thing about Israel? What would you say? Like, do you feel a sense of? Well, I guess maybe because if your Hebrew is not, you know, maybe. But do you feel a sense of community here that you wouldn't in America or in Canada in your case?
I'd say not, because I'm the type of person who I have nothing in common with people who don't share my most important values. So I'm not going to find common ground with them based on, you know, genetic affinity or geographical affinity. So I'd say no. But some of the positive things about this country in general are the climate. For those of us who are not very comfortable in a colder climate, it's a great place in that respect. Yeah. It's close to the Red Sea, the Mediterranean Sea, great for a number of outdoor activities like free diving, tank diving, stuff like this. Yeah, I'd say those are the only positives. Mm-hmm. Wow. Oh, and it's also close to other countries which are better. For example, much closer to China, to Britain, countries which I'm interested in visiting. It's a lot cheaper to fly there from here than from Canada.
But what about the actual something connected with the society? Anything good? I mean, well, you've mentioned that veganism is, you know, there's a vegan. I mean, they're uneducated, they're animals, but they have vegan options, you know.
Yeah. Well, again, I don't feel any more connection with an Israeli vegan than I do with an American or a Russian vegan. So, yeah. But you know, I guess, could I say that I have a sense of pride that this is a very predominantly vegan country? Maybe. I mean, I'm not sure what are the reasons for that. There's all kinds of speculation as to why veganism succeeds here, whereas it doesn't in other countries. So I'm not sure why. I mean, I feel, yeah, I guess it's a very cheap statement, but I'm proud of belonging to the most vegan country in the world, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really expect that from Israel. Does that have anything to do with kosher, or I don't know? Is there like Jewish holidays when you shouldn't eat meat, like religious holidays or something like that, that would promote that?
Well, yeah, I'd say the main reason why it took off here so easily is because of kosher laws. Kosher laws stipulate that you can't have a meat product mixed with a dairy product. So we already have a long tradition of actually pretty decent dairy alternatives, and also I guess some meat alternatives as well, because religious people, not everyone who follows these dietary laws is religious. Some of them are just traditional people, but yeah, so we already had like the infrastructure for vegan products, and yeah, and restaurants already catered to that. Like if you go to a dairy restaurant, you can guarantee that there will be no meat in anything you order. So you can just order something which doesn't contain dairy, which they have all kinds. It's called like parve. They have all sorts of dishes like that. And similarly, at a meat restaurant, if you order like rice or something, a pasta dish, you can guaranteed not to have any dairy in it. So yeah, I guess it was just a lot easier to set up vegan options in this sort of society.
Yeah, and
I mean, I think probably like the food in general, like in Israel, is probably better than in Canada. No, I would imagine.
I would definitely disagree with that statement.
wow.
Well, first of all, Canada is an extremely diverse society. Here, Israel is a very diverse racial society, but that's not the type of diversity that I care about or that we should care about. Canada is diverse in terms of food culture, musical culture, clothing culture, in all of the good ways. So basically, where I'm from in Vancouver, you could find name any country type restaurant, and there's a restaurant for that. There's a food culture around that society's food. And that's definitely not the case here. I mean, you'll be hard pressed to find a decent Chinese restaurant here. All restaurants are just basically, well, maybe Italian. There's Italian, and then there's just, I don't know, just the typical food here. Most restaurants, or burgers, most restaurants just have this regular type of food.
Is there a lot of like American fast food in Israel, or is that?
No, there's no such thing as a drive-through in Israel. Huh. I don't think there's a single drive-through in the country. There's McDonald's, but it's extremely expensive, so I'm not sure how popular it is for people to go there regularly, at least. I think there might be Burger King. I'm not sure. Yeah, that's McDonald's is the only restaurant that comes to the top of my mind in terms of American restaurants.
Oh, that's strange. Why is there no drive-through? Do you know?
I'm not sure. It might be because people tend to, like, it's a very small country, so if you're driving to McDonald's, it's probably just 5 minutes drive from your house. So that could be a reason. Yeah, I'm just blindly speculating though.
Yeah. So, like, what would be the kind of everyday concerns of Israelis? Would you say is that the price of real estate? Is that would be?
Oh yeah. Well, yeah, I forgot to mention that as a major disadvantage, and a reason for other people not to move here is, as you mentioned, extremely expensive. I mean, if you want to find an apartment in Tel Aviv for $1 million, that will get you a rundown place without an elevator, an old building like that looks like from Soviet Russia. Yeah, I mean, it's really like, it's a disgrace. For a nice apartment in Tel Aviv, probably like $4 million, something like this, for a decent apartment. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, you can go to like really remote areas, like in the desert. There's this place like 2 hours drive from where I live, and you can get a pretty nice apartment for relatively cheap there. But who wants to live there?
Yeah.
Huh. Interesting. So would you say like different like communities of like different Jews, do they interact with each other? Is there, like, well, like the Russian Jews and let's say whatever, do they interact well with each other, or just kind of stay to themselves? Or
yeah, I think in most societies you find this sort of, I don't want to say kind of racial segregation. And I guess there are various evolutionary reasons why people are drawn to this sort of behavior. But yeah, Russian people tend to live in Russian neighborhoods, speak Russian. That's not the case for all of them, of course. Hashtag not all. There are plenty of them who are just normal people who just happen to be Russian. But there's definitely a lot of people who stick to their own, not race, but their own like community. Yeah. And similarly, there are like Ethiopian Jews. They tend to exclusively marry each other, live in their own neighborhoods. Yeah, and I'd say the English-speaking community, I guess to a lesser degree, but I mean, I guess that's justifiable because it's based on language, but they tend to live in kind of in the same communities as well. So yeah.
That's interesting. But like in your circle of friends, like is it mostly like English speakers or? Yeah. Well, my boyfriend is Israeli, but yeah,
I don't really have too many friends who are Israelis.
Yeah.
How does he? Does he like your opinions of the country, or?
Yeah, I think he pretty much agrees with everything I have to say, with the caveat that he has a little bit of irrational nationalism to him, I guess, which he identifies as unjustifiable, irrational. But,
Yeah.
you know, it is just a feeling he has.
Yeah, yeah. That's interesting. And I guess the other part is the kind of Hasidic community. Recently, they were the draft was extended to them to a certain degree, and that
Yeah.
caused a big kind of a ruckus.
Yep. Yeah, that's I think that's just so embarrassing that this is a so-called like Western country, and we have this type of stuff happening. And we have a large chunk of the society which is that fundamentally religious
Yeah.
and non-peaceful as well. I mean, I'm not sure if you're aware, but a few years ago, I think it might have been last year or the year before, there was a gay pride parade in Jerusalem, and a religious guy just went and tried to stab a bunch of people to death.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I guess they also perform acts of terrorism from time to time. I mean, luckily the community generally condemns that, and the guy was crazy, but you know, they're kind of crazy. I mean, generally speaking.
But would you say that there's like a growing conflict between the secular and religious Jews, or?
If there's not, I'd like there to be. I definitely, this thing that you brought up about the draft is very divisive, and I guess it's all over the news like 24/7 lately. And yeah, I'd say probably most non-religious, actually, yeah, probably most religious, and because there's a difference, remember, between like ultra-religious and regular religious. Most of society, religious and secular, doesn't support their special treatment in terms of not having to be in the army.
But on the other hand, it's kind of an interesting, like Hasidic Jews and the Amish, kind of an interesting kind of phenomenon of kind of living, I guess, in a different century in a way, and you know, probably having kind of a sense of community that we don't have in the secular world. But also, I mean, I think relatively few people leave.
Yeah, you know what's funny is one of my best friends, she actually is an ex-ultra-Orthodox person.
Yeah.
And she lived with me. When I met her, she was ultra-Orthodox, and we lived together, and without me really saying a word or really questioning her faith in God, she eventually became a feminist and an atheist, and now lives with her boyfriend. Yeah, a pretty crazy story. And she also works for an organization which basically helps uphold the rights of ex-religious people, because they're in many ways discriminated against in society. And the government doesn't give them some of the things which they're entitled to, such as compensation for being brainwashed and not given a proper education.
But does she have any nostalgia at all for her kind of childhood, or no?
I don't think so. She was raised with 15 brothers and sisters.
Wow.
Yeah, I've mostly, I mean, of course, the sense of family and stuff, she really enjoyed that, as would anyone, but I feel like she really resents that society for basically taking away so many opportunities for her.
Yeah, there was an interesting kind of controversial case with Hasidic Jews in New York, where there was they go to their religious school, and then there was a secular school system, and after a certain point they just took over the secular school system in this specific district, and basically started, they didn't like the property taxes levied, and so they just started slashing slashing the schools and closing them down, stuff like that. It was a big kind of thing in New York, I guess, with the local community. But overall, I mean, I think it's an interesting culture, and kind of.
Oh, I think so too.
Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned that there was something happening in New York. There's actually all kinds of rampant corruption and, you know, violence, thuggery, which takes place in that community. Yeah, you should definitely look into that. It's very interesting, you could say.
Yeah.
and also intersect violence. There are different sects within the religious movement, and they occasionally like severely beat each other up.
Well, that happens sometimes with the Amish. Like they would attack each other and shave the beard because that's the biggest insult.
Yeah, yeah. There's just a lot of crazy stories coming out of that community. One of them is actually that I think it was one of the Hasidic communities was found guilty of kidnapping. Well, not kidnapping, but stealing the children of Yemenite Jews, bringing them to America, and then stealing their children, and by basically framing them for crime so that they would lose their children. Yeah. There are all kinds of stories like that. And also, if a religious person leaves the religion and he or she has children, the Hasidic community has all kinds of money. They will just make sure that person never sees their kids again, and that's meant as to inhibit them from leaving the religion in the first place. Yeah. It's really horrible.
Do they speak Hebrew or Yiddish?
I think most of them speak both, but supposedly there are some small communities which don't even speak Hebrew. I've never encountered them.
But, oh, okay. Yeah, because, yeah, I think in America they speak Yiddish. I watched a documentary, it was interesting. Well, it was about the ex-Hasidic believers, and they showed, it was just the things you were talking about, where they were battling over kids with a community, and the husband was abusive, and you know, they were fighting over the kids with a woman who was leaving. But it was interesting that they showed like a big stadium, you know, where, you know, Hasidic Jews gathered to sort of reaffirm their values and to prohibit the use of cell phones, etc. And it was just interesting because there was this rabbi giving a speech in Yiddish, and you know, since Yiddish is almost like a dialect of German, it was interesting to hear somebody like really yell in Yiddish, because it kind of reminded of kind of the German rallies, I guess, because the Germans no longer use those intonations for obvious reasons. So just,
that's really funny.
There is an interesting contrast. Yeah, there is like an alternative, a Russian kind of, you know, people who I guess you could compare to the Amish or Hasids, and they're the old believers. At one point, the Russian Orthodox Church imposed new rules, new ways of conducting liturgy, etc. And that was like back in the 17th century or something. Well, they split off. Like before, they crossed with two hands for Jesus, you know, and Son the Father, and now you had to cross with three fingers, I'm sorry, for the Holy Spirit. And they didn't recognize that shit. So they like proclaimed the patriarch to be the Antichrist and whatever, and they were exiled to Siberia, and they actually still exist. Like there are some communities in Oregon and around the world, and one of them, like, they hid in Siberia during the start of the Soviet Union. Did you hear about this story? They just lived in Siberia throughout the whole Soviet Union, through the war, not knowing what was going on. Just lived in this medieval way, like in this...
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, and then when finally Russians, like mainstream Russians, came in contact with them, they didn't have immunity to a lot of diseases because they were in isolation for so long. So most of them died, and only one woman remained. I think she might still be alive, actually, but she still like, lives in this forest. And
yeah. Wow, that's a crazy story.
Yeah. So, are you thinking of leaving Israel with these impressions, or?
Well, I'd love to, but you know, I'm in a relationship for 3 years now, and I don't really want to be separated, so. Yeah. I guess not. I mean, hopefully when my boyfriend finishes his education, hopefully he'll agree to leave as soon as possible.
Well, that's like, at what, like, did you ever like living in Israel at any point?
Yeah. For the first I guess for the first few years, I liked it. As I said, I enjoyed the novelty of it, and I lived in a few different areas of the country, and yeah, I mean, once the novelty wears off, you're faced with the objective reality of how, you know, a terrible economy, all kinds of other pervasive problems, and, you know, you're sick of it. Mm-hmm. And actually, I can't remember what percentage. I think it's like over 70% of people who move here from other countries move back if they're better countries. I mean, if they're from Russia, they tend to stay. From Ethiopia, they'll stay. Yeah, most people do move back to other Western countries.
Huh, that's interesting. Yeah, it's a whole kind of different perspective, but didn't expect it, I guess, to be so negative.
Well, I mean, maybe I'm just a pessimistic person. I mean, when I lived in Canada, I also had a list of complaints. So,
Yeah.
but I think, objectively speaking, Canada is a better place to live.
Yeah. So would you go back to Canada, or like if you had a choice?
Good question. Well, as I mentioned about the climate, I really am bothered by colder climates. I mean, even Italy is much too cold for me. So I don't know. Ideally, I'd live on the equator somewhere if I had a choice, on some tropical paradise. But yeah, I'm really not sure. I mean, Canada would probably be an improvement. United States would probably be. Britain would probably be. Singapore. There are all kinds of better places to live.
Well, Vancouver is pretty mild, though. I mean, I lived in Seattle. Wouldn't it be the same? I mean, it hardly ever goes to freezing temperature.
I find 20 degrees to be quite cold. I mean, right now we're in winter, and as you can see, I'm wearing shorts and a t-shirt, and I still find it a little nippy. So yeah, I by a warmer climate, I mean quite a lot warmer than Vancouver or any European area.
Yeah, it's can it turn out to be a pretty well. This is a novel take on Israel, certainly. Like, you wouldn't hear a lot of. Well, this is kind of, yeah, it kind of shows the kind of the point, I guess, I was talking about in the beginning, where you do project a lot of things in a place, and then the day-to-day reality would be pretty different from that.
Yeah, and if you think this is a novel, it's really not. I wish I could have brought my friend who lives down the street. She's originally from Australia. I mean, ask pretty much anyone who moved here from a better country what they think of this country, and they'll tell you more or less what I tell you.
Yeah.
I know a lot of Russians, actually, like they go to Israel and they like buy a house there or establish residence, and then they kind of split their time between Russia and Israel.
So they.
Yeah. I mean, actually, that's another thing. Most old Russian people who I strike up conversations with, they have nothing but horrible things to say about living here. They'll just bitch about it for hours on end, just like me. So yeah. I think that tells me that Russia is culturally and lifestyle-wise superior to living here, maybe.
Well, like Moscow today, like there's huge numbers of people, I guess, in Moscow who live kind of a Western style and lifestyle and have those ideas. But Moscow isn't really Russia. Moscow is like 14 million people in and of itself. It's larger than Israel in population, so there's a lot of variation. But yeah, there are a lot of kind of people living a middle-class lifestyle in Russia, and they kind of have some of them have an outlook on Russia the kind of same way like you have on Israel. I mean, in their case, it's like, what the fuck is going on here, you know? Yeah. But like, and so you would say like the Muslim Arabs also kind of little interactions with Jewish Israelis. Just kind of everybody seems like lives in their own kind of in their own kind of world.
Yeah, definitely. And there are a number of leftist bent sort of people which really oppose this. The fact that basically, if you're an Israeli, you'll almost never ever like encounter an Arab in a professional context, really. You'll never live in their neighborhood. Your kids aren't going to go to school with their kids. And yeah, a lot of people find that highly problematic. And I really don't blame them. I sympathize with that point of view.
Depends on what people want to do, if they're kind of Arabs who want that, but if they want to live in their own kind of environment. But I I think there was something interesting. Like I was thinking about it, and I was talking like before this channel, I had a channel where we discussed politics, kind of Young Turk style, except we had like horrible view numbers, and it was like the Ivan and Jacob show, and my the other co-host was an American Jewish guy, Jacob. We're still friends, and the kind of thing that I was interested in is, you know, like it seems like, you know, like Israeli Arabs and Palestinians, obviously they're the same people, but it seems like the terrorism comes primarily from Palestinians, right, from outside of Israel. And yet Israeli Arabs have obviously, you know, better access to targets. I mean, they live in the country, don't have to go through the checkpoint. And I think there's something interesting about like terrorism and the sense of cohesion of community and being connected to your land. So even if you live as a minority, kind of segregated from the Jewish majority in Israel, you still kind of have more of a sense of cohesion and dignity that comes from retaining your land. And yet kind of the same, kind of almost like a psychological experiment, the same ethnicity, the same group of people with the same culture, sort of kind of living outside of the borders, kind of having a sense, you know, whatever, of kind of disconnected from your land, you know. And it's kind of reminds me of sort of also like with Russians and Chechens, and most people don't care or don't know about this, but Chechnya is this Muslim republic within Russia. Culturally, it has like as much as connection as most like, secular Israelis would have with like Palestinians. I mean, it's very far removed. It's like a completely different world. And they tried to, after the Soviet Union collapsed, they tried to secede, but they weren't a separate Soviet republic like Kazakhstan or whatever, Belarus or Ukraine. There were autonomous republic within the Russian Soviet Republic. So they couldn't secede on these terms. And they tried to secede, and there were bloody wars, and these wars were bloody. Both Chechen wars, and it's like tens of thousands of people died, perhaps hundreds of thousands. Like, I think probably way beyond what happened between the casualties Israel inflicted on the Palestinians. But nonetheless, with them, seems like their animosity toward Russians would be much less than the animosity of Palestinians toward Israelis, and again, has to do with land. I mean, they basically have their own autocrat, and they in effect function like a vassal state to Russia, but they have still kind of connection to the land, and they don't have that kind of a blood feud with the Russians.
Interesting. Yeah. So they're unlike the Palestinians, you're saying?
I mean, there are like conflicts that happen, and they're not necessarily like very fond of each other, Russians and Chechens. But overall, it's like much more low key and nothing that intense.
Interesting.
Yeah.
The right-wing pundits would have us believe otherwise. Have you ever seen that website, jihadwatch.com?
Yeah.
Yeah, I used to read it pretty regularly, and I was under the impression that Russia and Chechnya are like at constant war with each other.
Well, I mean, they're definitely like some terrorists, or at least, but basically Putin appointed this strongman, Ramzan Kadyrov, and basically Russia dumped billions of dollars into Chechnya to pacify it. And it's a really bizarre thing, because it really is like very, very culturally disconnected from the rest of Russia. I mean, crazy things happen there. I mean, there's like a religious police there who, like, if you wear a skirt, they could shoot BB guns at you or detain you. They had like concentration camps for, you know, gays, where some of them were killed. And then like Russian government like evacuated some gays from Chechnya, and throughout the whole time, like the Ramzan Kadyrov was saying, there are no gays in Chechnya. They just don't exist in Chechnya at all.
Didn't Putin say the same thing about Russia?
No, Putin never
said. Oh no, that was Khomeini, right?
That was Kadyrov who said it. Yeah, he was saying there are no gays in Chechnya. Yeah.
You know, I guess this sounds racist, but I always find it extremely like weird when a white guy espouses like these extreme Islamic views.
Yeah.
Right? You know what I mean?
Yeah. You mean like the Chechens?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like it's the last thing you'd expect from people who look like that, right?
Well, I mean, it depends, like, I guess what you define white. I mean, they are, like, it's kind of the stupid word Caucasian makes no sense, because people on the Caucasus, it's like, if you consider, like, Stalin white, I guess. It depends on your definitions. They don't really, you're not gonna have any blue-eyed, like, blonde Chechens, but yeah.
Really?
But
Really?
no.
Oh, I thought they looked exactly like Russians for some reason.
No.
I think the only, like, really kind of white Muslims are, like, Bosniaks in Yugoslavia. But no, Chechens, they have a darker complexion in general, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. a little race science here. All right, well, I think we had a productive discussion. I mean, it's I know I've kind of walked away with a different impression of Israel, so I guess that's I don't know. I mean, the only kind of Israeli I remember is actually kind of connected with Chechnya, because when I was in high school, there was this very enthusiastic Israeli guy there, you know, one of the students, and I made this presentation about the war in Chechnya for like a social studies class, and it's like a kind of lift you, you know, how could this happen type presentation, and then I said, and I was like, and I just sat down, and he was like, hey man, he's like, you guys are killing all those Muslims everywhere, you know, nobody gives a shit. He's like, we get all this grief. So yeah, anyway, any last words, Israel, veganism, anything?
Yeah, I hope that everyone who's watching who is curious about animal rights will add me on Facebook and comment on my statuses.
Yeah.
And yeah, I hope anyone who's vegan who's watching will subscribe to my channel. That small subset of a subset, which are your subscribers.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, the only two people watching are like a Swedish guy and a Bulgarian guy who claim to watch all my videos, but...
My friend Kyle,
Yeah.
who's vegan, he watches all your videos. He was just telling me yesterday that he loves your videos. And my friend Ivan adores your videos.
That's awesome, thank you. Yeah, so, yeah guys, it's enough with fucking eating shit. Listen, you don't have to worry about me being vegan. I'm like drinking Coke and this shit. I'll be dead in a few years. So, yeah, but yeah, it's good not to eat meat. And listen, open up your mind, get different perspectives on Israel. Maybe this one is a bummer, you know, but check it out, go to Israel. Who knows, maybe you get there and Jesus comes back. That's another thing people are waiting for. All the Jews have to move to Israel, and then Jesus will come back. And another projection onto Israel. Nobody thinks about the high prices of real estate. Everybody's into Jesus or the Zionist conspiracy and all that stuff. The real world is much more complicated. All right, so thank you. That was pretty cool.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, hopefully it, yeah, it's, I'll check it. It should have recorded.
Oh, imagine if it didn't. What a bummer.
Oh, well, yeah, yeah, I guess I have a backup camera here. But it would only record me.
Oh, wow, that's a nice camera.
No, the camera isn't nice, it's just the setup looks fancy. The camera is just the cheap, but this is a nice thing.